Hello, 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 and welcome to our newest episode of Pop Culture Therapy. I'm Cruellica Kain.
Hello everybody, it's Advent Nebula.
And today we're going to be talking about the absurdities of horror anime.
Oh boy. Can you think of the tropes in horror anime that we've gone over before? But this time we're going to look at the more hilarious aspects that some of these series have thrown at us.
And so, the reason why I thought of this, and you enjoyed it because you have watched way too many horror animes like I have, is in the last 2 weeks, I've watched two really terrible horror animes.
Where over the last few months, when I've actually had time, just to give you guys a heads up, while she's been recovering from surgery, and I didn't bring this up during the last episode since we had Silver Quill, I still am working my ass off. Luckily, I have a vacation coming up.
Thank the gods. Because it's crazy how many hours you've been working. It's insane.
Yeah. So, you've watched...
I've watched recently the two horrible animes I've watched. One is called Devil's Line, and the other is called King's Game.
I have not seen King's Game, but Devil's Line seems to be what you describe as a horror psychopath, and I like to describe it as vampire innuendo boy love.
I consider it, so I go many levels. I consider it low rent psychopaths, vampire innuendo, which was done better in Dance in the Vampire Bund, and bad boys love and regular relationships. So the boys love element is very subtle, mainly because they focus on this relationship between the two main characters, a male and a female. The male is a vampire. The boys love is from some of the other characters. And the problem with this series is, one, it's only 12 episodes.
The manga is still ongoing, and it does not appear like it's going to get a sequel series.
And it's so rushed. And basically, every single thing they do, horror element-wise, or even story element-wise, feels like it was ripped off of Psycho-Pass, or ripped off of Servamp, or Dance in the Vampire Bund, or basically every single better series out there.
And from my understanding, in 12 episodes, they crammed 9 manga volumes into 12 episodes.
Oh, you can feel it. You can feel it. And the reason why it's absurd is because, well, in a bad way it's absurd. We're going to be talking about good anime as well. Is mainly due to the fact that the vampire aspect, it kind of reminds me of what they're doing in modern horror movies with vampires. That they're not making them actual regular bloodsuckers. They're making them where they turn into more demonic type characters. Like, think of 20 Days of Night.
30 Days a Night, I actually enjoy that comic, though.
I enjoyed it. But
it kind of gave a lycanthropy twist to the vampire.
Exactly. Where that 30 Days of Night did a good job. This is playing off that more modern take on vampires where they're going to become demonic creatures versus the elegance
of Bram Stoker.
Exactly. And while I understand we do need to have a change at times because not everything can be Bram Stoker or Stephanie Meyer now with them sparkling, that we have to do a different take, but it's just, the execution was terrible. King's Game basically is a short form anime. It is 13 episodes.
It's a sequel to a visual novel.
It is, and there's possibility that they may get a second season.
The problem is the visual novel never got a Western release.
That is it. Plus, so I look at this as, for King's Game, if I have to reference anyone, I reference Danganronpa because it's a classroom-style situation.
Corpse Party is another good one.
Corpse Party, Battle Royale. And then you take on the fact that it does consistent flashbacks. It's like Higurashi.
Yeah, but the problem is the flashbacks you will only understand if you played the original visual novel.
You either play the original visual novel or are not confused as hell because they talk about the flashbacks while they're talking in the more current setting. So they're going through this battle royale situation with the main character who is a survivor from a past battle royale situation. And rather than dealing with what's currently going on, it's always referencing what's happened in the past.
And I know what they're getting at. Not everybody played the game, but that's not good storytelling.
No, it's terrible storytelling. And the fact that I am constantly being barraged with remembering or having to deal with these flashbacks. When Danganronpa 3 did it, where you had the two parts that you had to flip-flop through, while that was frustrating,
from a narrative perspective, it was smart storytelling except for the home video release.
Thankfully, the home video release, you can make it work if you have 2 players.
Yeah.
If you have 2 players that you can have on, and I would recommend doing it in short snippets because it would get very confusing otherwise. Storytelling-wise, when Danganronpa did it for part 3, it worked because it was fun. You got this whole robust story.
And you got a backstory that you wouldn't have had otherwise to the second game that was filling in the holes.
Or even to the first game.
Yeah.
Because you actually got a backstory for the first game. Because that's the one thing that you really didn't get for the first season of Danganronpa or for the first 2 games. Actually, for all the games, technically.
Yeah, even though the third game is an alternate universe.
But you never actually saw the other classroom. Because in the first game, if you play that more so than the anime, you actually see hints of the other classroom and the destruction that occurred. But you never see hide nor hair of the students.
Yeah.
In this, though, you actually do see the students from the first classroom.
Yep, and you actually get the backstory to them because they're the focus of the second game.
Exactly. So that was fun. But it was very different of the telling. And that's a trope that I actually kind of hope goes into other future horror animes. That they will do robust storytelling. I think if you're going to do it where you're going to showcase flashbacks like what King's Game did, you have to do it in a way like what Danganronpa did, where you have 2 simultaneous series for the same thing. You had hope and you had despair. And while flip-flopping was a little confusing because there wasn't really good way of doing it without having 2 players, you could actually still watch things and you're like, oh, that works, that makes sense, versus what they did here. So I actually like that trope.
Yeah. Now, for me, the most recent I finished, and I played the game earlier this year and then rewatched the anime again, Angels of Death, which you really enjoy.
Oh, God, yes.
I will have to say, some of the tropes they have with some of the serial killers come out of left field, but the prison warden Charlotte, the most insane of the entire bunch. My God. It's basically, if you had the Battle Royale storytelling in a prison, but hunting down serial killers.
Well, and the one thing that is really important about the absurdity of this story is you have the main character, and she basically is the sweetest little girl.
And she's amnesiac, doesn't remember what's going on.
Rachel Gardner.
And her doctor, Danny, who is taking care of her, has a strange obsession with blue eyes.
Oh, God, yeah. But you see a relationship build between her and one of the prominent serial killers.
Isaac or Zach, depending on what the characters in the series are calling him. His real name is Isaac, but he prefers to go by Zach.
And he's bandaged up to high hell. He basically is like a mummy.
Yeah, he had a tortured childhood by his step-parents who lit him on fire.
And Rachel... So, not to spoil the series, so I won't really go into spoilers, but Rachel actually has a very traumatic past.
Yeah.
And she's an inmate of this hospital, just like the rest of the crazies there. But hers is so less terrible than theirs.
Yeah, I mean, out of all of them, the priest is probably the most messed up.
Oh, God, I know. But it's so good.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil some of them, because really the only one you can't spoil out of them is the warden, Charlotte. Because she basically ends up just being there for the fun of it.
Well, and for Angels of Death, what it does, different than I think any other horror anime that I have seen, is that it really does make you care about every single character. Not care like you want them to have a happy ending, but care because you're like invested in every scenario.
Yeah, they story pace every character perfectly with the backstory, no matter how fucked up it is.
Well, exactly. And Rachel Gardner, seeing everything through her eyes as a character is so beautiful. Because she's probably about 13, 14.
She's 14 years old.
So she's fairly young. But all that she watches, and like her goal throughout the series is to die.
And when you get her backstory, you completely understand that she might be the most screwed up mentally of all of the characters.
Oh, God, yes. And because originally how it starts is that Zach basically finds her and attempts to kill her so he can escape. Obviously, Zach has his own issues, and she makes a bargain with him that if she helps him escape, he'll kill her.
And throughout the series, there's bargains between the two of them and agreements on how the two of them are going to get out, because in this game, if you attack one of the other killers in the hospital, you are put with a target on your back as well.
Exactly. So you have to be very strategic. And that's how the anime is definitely represented. And this is the one thing that I like about when an anime is based off a video game. Because you actually get to see a strategic path that, yeah, it does spoil the video game for you to a certain extent.
And this one's a complete 100% adaptation of the video game.
And rather than being your typical season that's only like 12, 13 episodes, it's actually 16 episodes.
Yeah, so what it does is each part of the game was broken into 4 chapters, so it ended up doing 4 episodes for each chapter of the game.
And I watched it on a lark. I knew it was based off of a video game when I was looking it up, but I had watched it because it just seemed so fascinating. And Zach's by far my favorite character because he is so entertaining, and for being what he is, he actually has this code of conduct.
He has a code of honor, and one thing you learn about his backstory, because of his childhood, he's illiterate.
He is. And you actually see that so often in the show, and that's really the litmus of why Rachel and Zach make that bargain, because he cannot get out without her help. And Angels of Death is phenomenal.
Yeah, I highly recommend it if you're looking for just something to stream on Funimation right now for Halloween. Another series I ended up deciding to watch again, Another, which has some of the most fucked up death scenes you will ever see in a horror anime.
Another is so good.
And if you're into a ghost story, the basic premise is this kid goes to a small town after moving to the city, and there's an empty desk. Well, the empty desk is for a student who died 3 years prior. He's the only one that can see her because her soul is still trapped on the plane there, and she's getting revenge every year for her death on anybody in the town that's related to the people that killed her. And you've probably seen some of the memes with the girl who slits her throat with the knife in front of the classroom, or the umbrella scene.
Another is definitely, it is kind of like, I wouldn't say hyper violent.
But its death scenes are extremely gory.
It is. And I think the challenge when you have gory series is that you wonder, are they doing it for the scares or are they doing it for the storytelling? And another does it for the storytelling.
Yeah, it really does it for the storytelling, because if you know anything about Japanese lore on ghosts, when they are getting their revenge, do not hold back whatsoever.
No, their goal is to really give you the hell that you deserve. I think a lot of the more popular and prominent horror movies like Ring, Grudge, or Ju-on, or even the movie Sky High, they really show, like Sky High, for example, when you die of a tragic death, you're given 3 choices. You can move on to reincarnation, you can live as a ghost, or you can get your revenge, and you and the person you get your revenge on both automatically go to hell. Obviously, I am married to someone who would probably get their revenge and go to hell. What would you do?
I'd more than likely take the path of the wandering ghost.
I would probably do the same, because I feel like the ghost can be just as effective and help be like that guardian angel in a way.
Or the guardian terror, depending on the path you decide to walk, knowing you're not going to go to hell.
Exactly, because you can't exactly kill anyone, but you can either guide somebody in the right direction or guide somebody in the truly wrong direction. And another, I haven't watched it in a long time, but it was always a great, great show.
Yeah, and it's a full adaptation of its manga, which is only a 500-page manga in 12 episodes, but it did a really good job of adapting the entirety of the story.
So one series I have been watching, that I actually have to say, when Kaiju and I first watched it on Cartoon Network, he hated the show. Paranoia Agent. Which
is probably one, with Perfect Blue, the other great work of the late Satoshi Kon.
Well, and the one thing I've always found fascinating about Paranoia Agents is, obviously, you do have a villain, Lil Slugger. Nobody knows who Lil Slugger is. And Lil Slugger tends to attack people based on where they are mentally in life. They're not necessarily good people, nor are they bad people. But what makes the show so crazy is, one, you have the opening theme song, which is everybody laughing for like 5 minutes. It feels like 5 minutes. I know it's only like 2, but... And like the scariest episode in that series, because nobody truly dies, is actually, I don't know if you remember this episode, The Family.
Happy Family Planning.
Happy Family Planning, which is, they're not actually a family.
No.
They're all like fanboys and fangirls over this particular series.
And it's a series that has a death obsession, so they all are trying to kill themselves throughout the entire episode.
And you have a guy who's like a grandfather, a man, and then a little girl who's like 12. And it's so funny because the 2 adult men are like, you're too young to die. So they try to foil her suicide while attempting to commit their own the entire episode. And it's so absurd, But knowing Japanese culture is so realistic.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that they tend to do is jump in front of a train, and somebody does it, and they're like, oh, that's what it looks like. Maybe that's not for... And I'm like...
And towards the end of the episode, they walk into the famed suicide forest and try to hang themselves from the trees.
And they fail there. Then they go to a convenience store, and they're like, this has been a lot of fun. We need to hang out more. And I'm like, oh my God. And then there's another episode, because the one thing about Lil Slugger that I love in Psycho-Pass...
You mean Paranoia Agent?
Paranoia Agent. Wow. Too many series. Is the fact that because they don't know who he is, you get so many conspiracy theories of who Lil Slugger is. And there's one episode dedicated to basically being like little old housewives talking, but it feels so much like social media because everybody is theorizing everything about Lil Slugger and the attacks that have been made.
And when this series came out, YouTube was just in its infancy. This is when the age of the series came out. And kind of showed where social media was going, because that episode has a parody of the Japanese forum 2chan.
Yep. And they do so much with it. And it's frightening because you see where the future of social media is going. Because this was done... I'm trying to remember when the series was created.
I want to say
2004.
Yeah, I was going to say it was the early 2000s.
Yeah, it was 2004. And it was done so gritty. And normally I don't like the animation style because it's a very jerky animation style.
But with Kain, it's always worked with all of his...
Yeah.
He only has 5 projects, and his technique worked.
And it's a love letter to all things horror, because it's psychological horror, it's slasher horror, because you have the little slugger with the bented bat, you have sometimes you have elements of creature feature because of the hallucinations they get. And it just feels like something that you would see in the 70s because it has all that trippiness going along with it.
And it's so psychological throughout the entire run. And when you get to the final episode with episode 13, when it ties everything together, either you're going to be in for a mindfuck or you're going to go, oh, that explains everything.
It's basically like watching an animated version of Videodrome.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, okay, I'm confused, I'm excited, and I love it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I feel personally about all these crazy people.
Yeah, because it does tie itself together in a conclusive way, but you're going to either love it or you're going to hate it if you've never seen it. But that's basically all of Satoshi Kon's work.
And it's so... hit into the real world. Like, everything that's done, for the most part, can be grounded in reality.
Yeah.
And I think for a more modern age, this is a surprising type of series, because it's 17 years old now, but still...
holds up.
It holds up very well.
Everything of his has held up very well. Tokyo Godfathers, Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, and Paprika have all held up. And Paprika's another trippy mindfuck.
Well, so is Perfect Blue. Perfect Blue, basically, that makes you feel uncomfortable as a human being.
Yeah. It's just one of those horror films that can only be done in animation because of the way it's framed in storytelling.
Now, the one thing that we... I think that we should maybe showcase with all the series that we have talked about, good or bad, they have not done the one thing that you expect from horror. And that's a whole lot of TNA.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people equate TNA with horror, especially on the American side of the ocean, because we are really good at doing that. But
it has become an actual trope in most American horror.
But with Japanese, they're actually really good about doing the psychological aspect of horror.
Yeah, they want your mind to break with watching a horror movie.
They want you to feel incredibly uncomfortable because you are both cheering on the villain while actually cheering on for the hero or heroine. Because you want, like Angels of Death, perfect example. I wanted Rachel to succeed. And it's sad because you want her to succeed on helping to escape, but you know that succeeding means she's gonna die.
Yeah.
And how do you feel comfortable with that, knowing that you're eager for somebody to die?
Yeah. Now let's go on to one that has had 2 sequel series come out that neither of us have watched yet, but the original is basically the Groundhog's Day of anime.
Higurashi When They Cry. This is another series that's an example of being excited for all the characters and at the same time feeling very uncomfortable because there is no such thing as a happy ending, nor is anyone completely innocent.
The most innocent one is the one that's creating the time loop every freaking time.
Oh, I know. So When They Cry basically revolves around this one small town.
And it's 1986 in Japan. It's around a cotton festival that takes place every year.
And it's always around the same time of year. You have the set of twins, which you're confused about the set of twins. You have the wholesome girl. You have the 2 little chibi girls that are best friends.
And then you have the main character who has just recently moved into town a year prior in Koichi.
And so you kind of have the main character who you're basically the prominent character you're following is the main character Koichi. And he's confused because he's basically the person Groundhog's Day is revolving around. And everyone has tried to kill him. He has tried to kill others.
He has succeeded in killing others.
They have succeeded in killing him.
And there's 2 other characters in here that there's a larger conspiracy going around.
Well, and that's what makes no sense. You have this supernatural conspiracy, well, paranormal conspiracy. You also have this supposed alien conspiracy.
And then you have the government agent and the photographer journalist that actually turns out to be a paranormal investigator.
And it's so... in watching this series, you're very confused.
Until you get to the 13th episode of the 2nd season.
Yes. And the reason why I say that you're going to be confused is because it plays the Groundhog's Day or the Happy Death Day game where time loops over and over again. But it does it in such a subtle manner that you're like, is time really looping? What's kind of going on? Because the first attack on his life comes from the wholesome girl who has a hatchet.
Actually, it's called a billhook.
It's a crazy, crazy knife. And they're not doing anything outside of exploring, and she goes batshit crazy.
And she has this tendency to claw at her jugular.
Because for some reason, she feels that everything's going to hell.
And Rekka, the second real main character, who is the shrine maiden little girl, she's the one causing the time loops.
And then you have the twin sisters,
Mion and Shion.
And Shion... So this is what has always confused me about this show, and they've answered the questions, but it still confuses me. You have the twin sisters, which are identical twins. And sometimes they interchange.
And you have to watch to figure out when they switch.
You have to watch when they switch, and they try to lead you into a direction of who the evil twin is supposed to be. And depending on the time loop, it changes.
Yeah. And the one consistency is Grandma is the head of a Yakuza clan.
Underground Yakuza clan.
Yeah.
It's like the hidden secret that's
the whole town knows about.
Yeah, it's basically like the New York City sanitation department. Just leaving it like that. And then they have the Oyashiro curse, which forces people to go into this paranoia and homicidal rage. And everybody does it, and they don't know what it's starting from.
And you get the answer, which we will not spoil because we want you to watch that. And then there's Sadako and her uncle, the abusive uncle.
Oh, God, he is... no.
And the last of the main cast, Hanya, which doesn't appear till the first episode of the second season. She's the demon that's trying to stop the time loop. She's an actual good yokai.
And she will do anything at whatever means necessary. Not to be disruptive and destroy, but she will also do a psychological mindfuck.
Yeah.
And Koichi, he, like, not to, because I don't want to get into spoilers, but he remembers things.
And Rekka remembers every single time loop, every time it gets reset.
And that little girl, because she's little, she's
10 years old and she dies in every arc.
And she dies horribly.
And she remembers her deaths.
And between the two of them, they remember things, but nobody else does. And they're not good at communicating. And it's so weird because it is the first of the series, in my opinion, that starts the cutesy horror.
Which doubles down if you've seen the character designs for the new series.
Oh, yes. Because a lot of people talk about Zombieland Saga, Madoka Magica, Happy Sugar Life.
Which we'll get into next.
Which we'll get into as the cutesy series. But Higurashi really started it.
Because it came out at the time when the Moe thing was very big.
Moe was very big, and they wanted to really play around with the aspect of the harem element as well. Because you had Love Hina, Tenshi Muyo, so many of those other harems where you had this kind of dorky guy with this cavalcade of women of all different ages who pine after this one character. And so when you start this series, it plays literally
like a harem
anime.
Even though it starts out with a brutal death at the very beginning.
It starts with that brutal death, but you're not sure like where it comes, because the brutal death looks like it starts way in the future. Like they're doing that bait and switch where you see the end of the series and then you reverse back in time to the beginning.
And then you find out it's just the first 4 episodes you're going through.
Mm-hmm. And so it really plays on your anime pretenses of what you expect to see from A, B, and C of your typical tropes.
And for those of you who don't know, this was created as a video game from 7th Expansion as a bunch of really doujin-style visual novels. And the episode arcs basically follow what's called the question, then the answer arcs.
Mm-hmm.
Because he released the first 4 questions, then the last 4 is answer arcs.
And then our more recent, which a lot of people are a little confused when they're going to go to Higurashi Go, I think it is.
Go and Sao, which are actual sequels to this series.
And a lot of people were very confused because it's 3 seasons. It's 2 full seasons of 26 episodes, and the 3rd season is 13. So you have 3 seasons of the series, and then it just, based on the conclusion, not too many people were sure that more could be done with it.
And then when you get into the 2nd episode of Gao, you find out the time loops are still going on, even though they resolve with the initial villain.
It changes your dynamic of what things happen. And so I really like what it does because it really makes you think. And it is gory, it is violent.
And there are some scenes that aren't gory and violent, but the violent tendency of what is going on, even though it's not shown, is even more gut-wrenching than it actually being shown.
Oh, yeah. Like, there are certain people in this show that I feel don't get their comeuppance as immediate or at all. Which is a hard thing because you actually care about all of these characters, because even if they are dying because of their resurrection, so to speak, you know so much about them. There is no secrets to any of them.
Yeah, you'll have the secrets through the 1st season, but when you get into the latter half of the 2nd season and everything's revealed, you're like, okay.
Everything makes sense in a very
disturbing manner.
Oh, yes. So let's go on to our next series.
Happy Sugar Life. So if you ever wanted a series where a high school girl wanted to be a mommy but didn't want to get pregnant, here's the show for you. The show starts out with her killing parents and kidnapping a 6-year-old child and deciding to raise her as her daughter. And it goes just absurd from there.
I have not had the pleasure of watching this series, but obviously I've always wanted to. But in looking it up, it is another one of those series that definitely takes on that cutesy moe presentation. And what worries me about it is, not really worry, but what intrigues me is that the fact that nobody's safe.
Yeah, nobody truly is safe in this. And what's probably the most disturbing character in the show is the main character's aunt, who supports everything Shikoko does. Because the aunt ends up liking Min a little too much that she'll end up kidnapping Min and locking him into the bedroom with herself. So when she finds out what her niece did, she's like, oh, that's okay, honey. Yeah, this series subverts tropes like you would not believe. And I don't want to spoil anything, but towards the climax of the show, a certain character gets her comeuppance, and then you're like, how's this show going to continue? And then you see as it goes on for its final 2 episodes, like, oh, okay. I didn't see that coming.
Well, and that's what I really appreciate about horror in anime. Because you get a lot of action anime, you get a lot of sci-fi anime. And with those series, they tend to go on forever. Like, for example, One Piece.
Which is going to have episode 1000 this week.
And then you have other series like even Full Metal Alchemist. Has 3 seasons.
Concluded episode 64.
Then you have, and Higurashi is an outlier when it comes to horror anime.
Because it has so much you can still tell.
Exactly. But most horror anime can be told in bite-sized pieces, which is one thing I really love. Yes, Parasite is a little bit longer.
But it adapted all 13 volumes of its manga in a 26-episode series that worked.
And Parasite is another series that takes on that more psychological element.
With the creature feature.
And that's one of the few series that actually does a creature feature in anime form. Because when you do a lot of these series that have creatures, so to speak, they're either lycanthropes or zombies, which you have for High School of the Dead, or you have vampires. But this particular one takes on the
alien creature feature.
It does, and it's done in an interesting manner because Parasite basically is about, almost like if you had to equate it to something relatively known, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah. And what the anime did is the manga was written in the late 80s, early 90s, and they updated the anime to take place in modern day, so the absence of cell phone technology in the anime kind of makes sense.
Well, exactly, because you need to have it. It's a series that could not be modernized. Like, think of Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Donald Sutherland.
It wouldn't work today.
It could not work today because we have so many communication resources that we can clearly see if somebody has changed. And same thing with Parasite. It can't work in a very modern setting because of the fact that you would know.
Yeah.
Everybody is filmed everywhere. Everybody is somewhere. That if something was different about a person, you couldn't hide it. Because you would have to literally mimic the person perfectly.
Yeah, where the live action films that they did for it are the only time I've seen it where they actually were able to do it with the modern technology with somebody being in charge, a la They Live.
Well, but they were able to do it in a way that actually worked still.
Yeah.
It's one of the few live action movies that still works. For having such a thing like that, because even the Invasion with Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman couldn't work in a modern setting because they missed the line. And I think the fascinating thing about this horror anime for Parasite, being a little bit longer than your bite-sized series, is the fact that you have a main character that it revolves around, and he takes on such a hefty responsibility of making sure that his alien presence is under control. And watching that dynamic between the two is actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Because other people that have been taken over by the alien...
It's taken over their brain, where in his, he noticed it right away, so it only took over his left arm.
And he made a deal with the devil, so to speak, to ensure that he still had control.
And there's only one other character that has full control over their host. But this one actually took over this person's brain. But I don't want to spoil too much about said character's brain makeup, because that forms the entire relationship that one has.
Oh, yeah. So, another series, before we go too long, that I think is important to talk about when we're looking at horror anime is Madoka Magica.
A lot of people don't associate it with a horror anime, but it actually is, and it's written by the famous Gen Urobuchi.
And Madoka Magica...
It's basically,
or Madoka Magica.
Madoka Magica is basically when time travel turns you insane.
And it's playing on... The one thing it does so very subtly is like a Highlander concept.
Yeah. And it's the first series to really break the magical girl trope and subvert it. And then we started getting all the other ones like Magical Girl Sight and all the others that have come out since.
But Madoka is the main character. And she actually doesn't become a magical girl right away. She is actually a witness to watching the hell go around with all the other characters. Like, her best friend becomes a magical girl.
And she gets taken under the wing of an older girl named Mommy. And everybody that knows the series knows that episode 4, with Mommy's death, is where you start to see the subversion of the entire series.
Well, it really is, because the challenge with that particular series is, one, to make a contract to become a magical girl, you are giving up something. Or in her best friend's experience, she is doing it to protect the boy she loves. Due to her foolish adventure into doing this, the relationship between that boy and girl, oh wow.
Yeah. And then, I'm sure most people at this point know, Kyubey and his race are basically doing it to feed their own souls. For the whole reason of... Because what happens with magical girls in this series is they eventually turn into what are called the witches, and the Kyubey race feeds off the negative energy from those witches. So it's a cycle that they have created to actually invade the Earth.
And they do it kind of like in that They Live style. They Live the movie, where they're everywhere, but they're nowhere at the same time. Because they're everywhere, but nobody knows about it. Because when Monica goes, or Madoka, I keep on saying Monica, Madoka goes home to her family is like perfectly normal. But you can see the rumblings underneath, especially from the mom.
The mom's very unhappy in her marriage.
And everything, you could just see everything going wrong underneath this layer of perfection. And it really is what pushes this series forward, is like the character Mommy who passes, she presents herself as this perfect being.
She's the greatest of all the magical girls. And then it gets offed.
And you're like, wait, what? What's going on?
And then Corone, the one who has the time travel power, whose whole purpose is to stop Madoka from becoming a magical girl.
To the point where she will kill her, if need be. Because Madoka, in a different alternate timeline, because Madoka is basically is another Groundhog Day version in a way, has died hundreds of times.
And the time she hasn't died, she's been corrupted and sided with Kyubey.
And this poor girl, Crone, has seen Madoka die or get corrupted hundreds of times. So her mind is broken. Literally broken.
To the point that she's now, at this time frame, doing everything she can to stop Madoka from achieving her goal. But in doing so, she actually achieves what she's wanted the whole time.
We're not going to spoil what that is, because it's insane.
And it ties into the Rebellion movie and the current movie project that Gen Urobuchi is now working on to tie up the loose ends that movie left on a cliffhanger 7 years ago.
And so, if you haven't had a chance to watch it, I would definitely watch all of these series, except for Devil's Line and King's Game. I would watch all the good series, or take a look online. It's amazing how many series are actually categorized as horror anime, and that have great storytelling. So keep an eye on it, because it's absurd how many series we do have, and all series that haven't even been given more chances to work with, like Blue Gender.
Yeah.
So on that note, we are going to conclude this episode, and we are going to go on to the next step of horror, talking about one of our favorite directors for horror movies.
Yes, the great David Cronenberg, which had a stretch of basically the late 70s through to the early 90s of some of the best subversive horror movies that the genre's ever produced.
And his horror is really something that you have to be open to and willing to be uncomfortable, because it will make you freak out and cheer for the entire thing. So we will be back soon with that. So bye!